July 1918. A basement in Yekaterinburg. Nicholas carried his sick son Alexei down the stairs, while Alexandra requested a chair for her weak heart. They thought they were being evacuated. Instead, gunfire ended the 300-year Romanov dynasty in 11 minutes. But rewind 30 years. Two teenagers calling each other Nicky and Sonny, exchanging numbered love letters, desperately fighting their families to marry. Their love was genuine, passionate, completely devoted. It was also catastrophic for Russia. How did the most loving royal marriage of the 20th century become the catalyst for history's bloodiest revolution? Welcome to Hearts and History. I'm here to tell you one of the most epic love stories ever told, spanning 3 decades from glittering ballrooms to that blood-soaked basement. Get comfortable, dim the lights, settle in for sleep. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. We explore history's greatest love stories every week, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how this channel reaches people around the world, from midnight in Tokyo to afternoon in London. Ready? Let's meet young Nicholas. Innocent beginnings and royal duties. November 1894. Nicholas Romanov is 26 years old and completely terrified. His father, Alexander III, just died unexpectedly. Nicholas is now Tsar of the largest empire on earth, and he has no idea what he's doing. "What is going to happen to me and to all Russia?" he sobbed to his cousin. "I am not prepared to be a Tsar. I never wanted to become one. I know nothing of the business of ruling." This gentle, dreamy young man just inherited absolute power over 125 million people. And honestly, he was right to be scared. See, Nicholas's father was intense. Alexander III could bend iron bars with his hands. Literally, he ruled through fear, crushing rebellions with secret police and Siberian exile. Massive, intimidating, absolutely ruthless when he needed to be. Nicholas, 5'7", soft-spoken, raised to obey, not lead. Alexander had planned to train him gradually for power, but kidney disease killed the Tsar at 49, leaving Russia in the hands of a man who'd rather be reading poetry than governing. The contrast was brutal. Iron fist to velvet glove overnight. And Russia noticed immediately. Into this crisis stepped Princess Alix of Hesse-Darmstadt, Queen Victoria's granddaughter, raised in England's strict moral atmosphere. Beautiful, deeply religious, absolutely certain of her convictions. Where Nicholas wavered, she was steel. Where he was gentle, she could be rigid. She believed completely in divine right, in autocracy, in her future husband's sacred duty to rule without compromise. But here's the thing, they'd been in love for years already, since she was 12 and he was 16. This wasn't political convenience. This was genuine, desperate, all-consuming teenage romance that somehow survived into adulthood. 1884. Nicholas first saw Alix at her sister's wedding in St. Petersburg. She was 12, he was 16. He wrote in his diary, "I sat next to little 12-year-old Alix, whom I really liked a lot." Cute, right? 5 years later, when she visited again, 19-year-old Nicholas was captivated. "My dream is someday to marry Alix H," he confided to his diary in 1891. "I have loved her for a long time, but more deeply and strongly since 1889. For years he pursued her while she agonized. The obstacles seemed impossible. His parents opposed the match completely." Nicholas's parents considered tiny Hesse an insignificant principality, unworthy of alliance with mighty Russia. But the real problem was Alix herself. She kept refusing him. As a devout Lutheran, she couldn't bear converting to Russian Orthodoxy, which marriage to the Russian heir required. For years, letters flew between them, numbered to mark days of separation. They called each other Sonny and Nicky, sending tokens of affection across thousands of miles. She loved him. He was desperate for her. But faith seemed stronger than love. Until April 1894, at yet another royal wedding, everything changed. With family help, Nicholas finally convinced Alix that converting didn't mean abandoning Christianity, just embracing a different form. April 8th, 1894, she accepted his proposal. Nicholas's diary that night. "Oh God, what happened to me then? I cried like a child, and so did she. Only her expression changed immediately. Her face lit up with quiet contentment. Their happiness lasted exactly 7 months. That autumn, Alexander III fell gravely ill with kidney disease. Despite his weakness, he insisted on receiving Alix in full dress uniform, giving the young couple his blessing. November 1st, the Tsar died. The day after Alexander's death, Alix converted to Russian Orthodoxy, becoming Alexandra Feodorovna, her first public appearance in Russia. Following her father-in-law's coffin through streets lined with weeping crowds, dressed in black. Less than 3 weeks later, they married in a subdued ceremony, the court still officially mourning. Alexandra later wrote to her sister that her wedding felt like a mere continuation of masses for the dead. Not exactly the fairy tale wedding she'd dreamed of. But that night Nicholas wrote perhaps history's most intimate royal diary entry. "I have never ever spent such an evening. My dear Alix was so patient with me, suffering through all the endless ceremonies. Finally we were alone. Heavenly bliss was what I felt." From that night forward, Nicholas and Alexandra were devoted with an intensity that observers found remarkable and sometimes disturbing. They hated separation even briefly. When duties forced them apart, they wrote constantly, sometimes multiple letters daily. They developed their own love language, wifey, hubby, lovey, sonny, but this beautiful private devotion would soon clash with the brutal realities of ruling Russia. Picture the Russia Nicholas inherited. Largest empire on earth, stretching from Poland to the Pacific, also among Europe's most backward powers. While Britain and Germany industrialized, most Russians remained peasant farmers, working land they didn't own. Using methods unchanged for centuries, the Winter Palace had 1,500 rooms. Peasants shared single-room huts with livestock. The wealth gap was obscene, and ruling this paradox of extremes, a gentle, uncertain man whose greatest strength was his wife's iron will. Their love story was about to collide with history, and history, as we'll see, would win. A love against all odds. Picture this: 19-year-old Nicholas, heir to the Russian throne, completely smitten with a 12-year-old German princess named Alix. Sounds weird until you realize royal marriages were basically arranged decades in advance. But here's the thing, Nicholas wasn't playing politics. This wasn't some calculated alliance. He genuinely fell for this girl, hard. By 1889, he's writing in his diary about his dreams of marrying Alix. His parents? Absolutely horrified. She's from tiny Hesse, basically nobody in their eyes. But Nicholas didn't care about politics. He cared about Alix. And she, well, she kept saying no. Not because she didn't like him. The chemistry was definitely there, but she was devoutly Lutheran, and marrying the Russian heir meant converting to Orthodox Christianity. For Alix, this felt like betraying everything she believed in, so for years, Nicholas pursued her while she agonized. Think about that pressure, choosing between love and faith, between the man you're falling for and the God you've worshipped your entire life. Their separation was torture. Nicholas would send letters through his brother, each one numbered, so they could track the days apart. Can you imagine numbering your love letters like a countdown to happiness? They had pet names, Sonny for Alix, Nicky for Nicholas. These weren't formal royal communications. These were raw, desperate love letters from two young people who couldn't be together. The kind of stuff that would make you cringe if you found it in someone's diary, but also break your heart, because the longing was so real. The letters reveal everything. Nicholas pouring out his feelings, Alix torn between wanting him and her religious convictions. She'd write about her struggles, her prayers, her sleepless nights wondering if God would forgive her for converting. Meanwhile, Nicholas is basically dying of lovesickness, writing things like, "I have loved her for a long time, but more deeply and strongly since 1889. This went on for years, years of will they won't they, while the entire Russian court watched and wondered if their future Tsar would ever get married. By 1894, the situation was getting desperate. Nicholas was 26, basically ancient for a royal bachelor. His parents were pressuring him to marry someone else. Anyone else, preferably someone from a more important family. But Nicholas refused. It was Alix or nobody. So when another royal wedding brought them together in April 1894, family members basically staged an intervention. They convinced Alix that converting wasn't abandoning Christianity, just embracing a different form of it. Semantics maybe, but it worked. The religious barrier that had kept them apart for years suddenly crumbled. April 8th, 1894. The day everything changed. After years of rejection, Alix finally said yes. Nicholas's diary entry that night. God, it's heartbreaking. Oh God, what happened to me then? I cried like a child, and so did she, only her expression changed immediately. Her face lit up with a quiet contentment. Imagine that moment, all those years of longing, of numbered letters, of religious torment, and suddenly they're engaged. They probably couldn't believe it was real. After all that waiting, they were finally going to be together. But here's where the story gets brutal. That autumn, Nicholas's father, Alexander III, started dying. Kidney disease, completely unexpected. This massive, intimidating man who'd ruled Russia with an iron fist, suddenly bedridden and weak. The engagement that should have been pure joy became overshadowed by this approaching tragedy. Alexander insisted on meeting Alix in full dress uniform, despite being barely able to stand. He gave them his blessing, knowing he was dying. It was like happiness and grief colliding in the worst possible way. November 1st, 1894. Alexander III dies. Nicholas becomes Tsar overnight, something he never wanted, never felt ready for. His diary entry is devastating. What am I going to do? I am not prepared to be Tsar. I never wanted to become one. And Alix? The very next day she converts to Orthodox Christianity, taking the name Alexandra Feodorovna. Their dream of marriage was finally happening, but under the worst circumstances imaginable. Instead of celebrating their engagement, they're planning a funeral. Talk about emotional whiplash. Alexandra's first public appearance as a Russian Grand Duchess, following her father-in-law's coffin through streets lined with weeping crowds. She's dressed in black, mourning a man she barely knew, while trying to comfort the man she loves who's now terrified of being Tsar. The optics were terrible. People started calling her the funeral bride. Instead of joy and celebration, her introduction to Russia was death and grief. You can see how this set the tone for everything that followed. 3 weeks later, they got married. But it wasn't the fairy tale wedding you'd expect. The court was still in mourning. Everything was subdued, almost secretive. Alexandra later wrote to her sister that the wedding felt like a mere continuation of masses for the dead. Imagine you've waited years for this moment, overcome every obstacle, and your wedding feels like a funeral. The joy they dreamed about was completely overshadowed by duty and grief. Love conquered all the external barriers, but couldn't escape the timing of history. But here's what gets me about their story. Despite everything going wrong, their love was real. Nicholas's wedding night diary entry proves it. I have never ever spent such an evening. Heavenly bliss was what I felt. After years of obstacles, religious struggles, family opposition, and a death in the family, they finally had each other. Love had won, or so they thought. They had no idea that their happiness would become Russia's tragedy, that their devotion to each other would blind them to everything else. That love, taken to extremes, can be its own kind of curse, a transition into turbulence. October 1894. Alexander III is dying, and nobody's ready for what comes next. Nicholas, 26 years old, sits by his father's bedside crying. The most powerful man in Russia, reduced to a terrified son. His father had been this giant, 6'4", massive hands that could bend iron bars. Now he's wasting away from kidney disease. And Nicholas is about to inherit an empire spanning 11 time zones. He keeps saying the same thing over and over. I'm not prepared for this. November 1st, Alexander III dies. The next day, literally the next day, Alix converts to Russian Orthodoxy and becomes Alexandra Fyodorovna. Think about that timing. Your future father-in-law dies, you convert religions, and suddenly you're about to become Empress of Russia. No adjustment period, no gradual transition, just boom, you're Orthodox now, and by the way, you'll be running an empire soon. Alexandra later described these weeks as the most overwhelming of her entire life, and that's saying something, considering what came later. November 26th, 1894. The wedding. But here's what makes it so haunting. It wasn't really a celebration. The court was officially in mourning. Alexandra walked down the aisle in a dress of silver and white, but everything else was draped in black. She later wrote to her sister that the ceremony felt like a continuation of masses for the dead. Imagine that. Your wedding day, the happiest moment of your life, and it's happening in the shadow of a funeral. The symbolism feels almost too perfect now. Those first months were brutal. Every decision Nicholas made got scrutinized. Every public appearance dissected. The Russian court had this ruthless way of evaluating their rulers. They wanted strength, decisiveness, that commanding presence Alexander III had possessed. Instead they got Nicholas, soft-spoken, hesitant, always looking to Alexandra for reassurance. The aristocrats started whispering immediately. This isn't what an autocrat looks like. This isn't how a Tsar behaves. And honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. Nicholas had never been groomed for absolute power. See, Nicholas had this fatal flaw for a ruler. He was actually a decent human being. He hated making harsh decisions. He'd agonize over appointments, over policies, over everything. Alexander III had ruled through fear and intimidation. Nicholas wanted to be liked. He wanted consensus. But here's the thing about absolute monarchy. There is no consensus. There's just the Tsar's will. And when that will keeps wavering, when it keeps second-guessing itself, the whole system starts to crack. The empire needed strength. Nicholas offered kindness instead. Enter Alexandra. While Nicholas doubted himself, she had zero doubts about anything. Divine right of kings. Absolutely. Autocracy as God's will. No question. Constitutional monarchy. Blasphemy. She'd been raised by Queen Victoria's moralistic court, taught that royal duty was sacred, uncompromisable. So when Nicholas started wavering on political decisions, Alexandra stepped in. Not publicly, never publicly, but in their private moments, she became his backbone, his conscience, his political advisor, and slowly, very slowly, her certainty started replacing his doubt. The pressure was coming from everywhere. Liberals demanding reforms, conservatives demanding crackdowns, peasants starving in the countryside, revolutionaries printing illegal newspapers, and Nicholas, stuck in the middle, trying to hold together an empire that was basically medieval, while the rest of Europe industrialized around them. Every morning brought new crises. Every decision seemed to anger someone. Alexandra would find him pacing their private rooms, overwhelmed. That's when she'd remind him, "You're the Tsar. Act like it. Be autocratic. God chose you for this." But here's what nobody talks about. They were still desperately in love. Behind all the political chaos, all the public criticism, they had this incredible private relationship. Nicholas would write in his diary about their quiet evenings together. Alexandra organising their family photographs. Him reading to her while she embroidered. They created this intimate world inside the Alexander Palace, where they could just be Nicky and Sonny again, two people who'd found each other against all odds. The problem was that private world started becoming their only world. Then came 1905, revolution. Strikes everywhere. The Potemkin mutiny. Nicholas's uncle getting assassinated. The whole empire seemed to be coming apart, and suddenly everyone's demanding a constitution, a parliament, limits on autocratic power. Nicholas was horrified. Alexandra was furious. This goes against everything we believe, she told him. You're God's anointed ruler. You don't negotiate with revolutionaries. But the alternative was civil war. So reluctantly, very reluctantly, Nicholas signed the October Manifesto. Constitutional monarchy. It felt like betrayal of everything he'd inherited. That's when things got really weird. Unable to control politics, unable to connect with their people, Nicholas and Alexandra started turning inward, searching for meaning in mysticism, seance, faith healers, anyone who claimed divine connection. They'd always been religious, but now it became something else, something desperate. They started believing that God spoke directly to them, that they had special spiritual insight unavailable to ordinary people. It was intoxicating and dangerous, because when you think you're getting messages from heaven, you stop listening to voices from earth. By 1903, they were consulting every holy man, every mystic, every self-proclaimed prophet who showed up claiming divine powers. Most were obvious frauds. Some were probably sincere, but deluded. All of them fed Nicholas and Alexandra's growing belief that they were special, chosen, misunderstood by their critics. The stage was set perfectly. Two desperate parents, an empire in crisis, and somewhere in Siberia, a peasant with hypnotic eyes and claims of miraculous healing power was about to hear about the royal family's most desperate need, the rising intrigue, a mystic in the court. Winter 1905. The Imperial Nursery at Tsarskoye Selo. Little Alexei is bleeding again. Another episode that sends the doctors into hushed conferences and Alexandra into hysterical prayer. Nicholas paces outside the nursery door, helpless. Inside, his son writhes in agony from internal bleeding that won't stop. The best physicians in Russia stand around looking grave and useless. This is the moment when desperation opens doors that should stay closed, when a mother's love becomes so fierce it will embrace anyone, anything that promises to save her child. Enter Grigory Rasputin, Siberian peasant, self-proclaimed holy man, 6 feet tall, with wild hair and eyes that people swear could see straight through your soul. He smells like the stables, drinks like a sailor, claims God speaks to him personally. The aristocrats at court whisper he's a Kleist, a member of a heretical sect that believes you have to sin deeply before you can be truly forgiven. True or not, there's something about this man, something that makes people believe, even when they know better. Alexandra first hears about him through her lady-in-waiting, some peasant in St. Petersburg who can stop bleeding with prayer. She's tried everything else, doctors from Germany, specialists from Vienna, holy relics blessed by patriarchs. Nothing works. Alexei's episodes are getting worse. Last month he nearly died from a simple nosebleed. The doctors just stand there with their diplomas and their helpless expressions while her baby screams. So when someone mentions a Siberian mystic, well, what mother wouldn't try? What choice does she have? Rasputin's first visit to the palace happens at midnight, November 1905. Alexei is having one of his worst episodes yet, internal bleeding in his leg. The boy hasn't stopped crying for hours. Alexandra summons this strange peasant to the imperial bedroom. He walks in like he owns the place, doesn't bow, doesn't remove his cap, just sits by Alexei's bed and starts praying in that deep hypnotic voice. Within minutes, silence. The child sleeps. The bleeding slows. Nobody can explain it, including the doctors who've been useless for days. That night changes everything for Alexandra. She's watched her son suffer for over a year, helpless, guilty, desperate. Now this peasant walks in, and Alexei improves immediately. Call it placebo effect, call it hypnosis, call it divine intervention. Alexandra calls it a miracle. From that moment, Rasputin becomes untouchable in her eyes, the man who can save her son, the answer to her prayers. She starts inviting him back regularly, not just for medical emergencies, but for advice, for comfort, for the absolute certainty he radiates that everything will be fine. Rasputin's methods are unconventional. He tells Alexandra that doctors make Alexei worse by fussing over him. Stop the treatments, stop the aspirin, which actually does thin blood and makes bleeding worse. Just pray, stay calm, trust in God's will. Weirdly, this works. Modern doctors think Rasputin succeeded through stress reduction. Hemophiliacs bleed more when anxious. Rasputin's calm confidence probably did help, but Alexandra believes it's divine power flowing through this unwashed peasant, and that belief changes everything. For her, for Nicholas, for Russia, the influence spreads beyond medicine. Alexandra starts consulting Rasputin about everything. Should Nicholas dismiss this minister? What about that military appointment? The peasant who supposedly talks to God begins offering opinions on running an empire. And here's the terrifying part. Alexandra listens. Then she whispers in Nicholas's ear during their intimate moments. Her beloved husband, who's always deferred to her judgment about their children, starts deferring to her judgment about everything else. Through Alexandra, Rasputin's voice begins echoing in the corridors of absolute power. The Russian elite watch this development with growing horror. Bad enough that the Empress consults a peasant about her son's health. But state appointments? Military decisions? Foreign policy? Rasputin has no education, no experience, no qualifications beyond Alexandra's desperate faith in his healing powers. Worse, rumours spread about his personal behaviour. The drinking, the womanizing, the heretical religious practices. How can the Russian Orthodox Empire be influenced by this scandalous figure? How can the Tsar allow it? But Nicholas won't hear criticism of the man who helps Alexei. Court society fractures along new lines. Those who accept Rasputin's influence versus those who despise it. Old aristocratic families find themselves frozen out of imperial favour if they question the mystic's role. New appointments go to Rasputin's recommendations, often incompetent men whose only qualification is the peasant's approval. The government becomes increasingly unstable. Ministers know their positions depend not on competence or loyalty to the Tsar, but on whether they can manage this bizarre relationship with an uneducated Siberian who somehow commands the Empress's absolute devotion. Meanwhile, Russia lurches toward catastrophe on every front. Revolution in 1905 forced constitutional monarchy on reluctant Nicholas. Now labour strikes spread, peasant unrest grows, military defeats accumulate. The empire needs steady leadership and capable ministers. Instead, it gets chaos filtered through Alexandra's mysticism and Rasputin's ignorant advice. The gap between imperial palace and Russian reality widens daily. While the royal family obsesses over Alexei's health and Rasputin's latest pronouncements, their vast nation slides toward collapse. Love and desperation are destroying everything they're supposed to protect. This is how empires crumble. Not through external invasion or military defeat, but through internal contradictions that eat away at authority until nothing solid remains. The Romanov dynasty survived Napoleon, the Crimean War, multiple assassination attempts. It cannot survive a mother's love twisted into political influence, cannot survive a weak Tsar's inability to separate family needs from state requirements, cannot survive the scandal of a peasant mystic whispering in the Empress's ear while the nation burns. The rising intrigue has only just begun, and Russia will pay the price. Turbulent times. The 1905 Revolution. January 9th, 1905. St. Petersburg. A peaceful march of workers carrying icons and portraits of the Tsar approaches the Winter Palace. They want better wages, shorter hours, basic human dignity. Father Gapon leads them, believing Nicholas will listen to his children's pleas. Instead, machine guns. Hundreds dead in the snow. Bloody Sunday, they called it. And just like that, Nicholas went from little father to murderer in his people's eyes. The revolution had begun. What happened next was chaos. Strikes spread like wildfire across the empire. Peasants burned manor houses. Sailors mutinied on the battleship Potemkin. Nicholas's own uncle, Grand Duke Sergei, was blown apart by a terrorist's bomb. The Tsar was terrified, hiding at Tsarskoye Selo while his empire disintegrated. Alexandra was pregnant with Alexei, sick with worry, their perfect world of family devotion, crumbling under the weight of reality. Something had to give. Enter Sergei Witter, the one man who might save the monarchy. He told Nicholas bluntly, "You have two choices, military dictatorship or constitutional monarchy." Nicholas agonized for days. Give up absolute power? The very idea made him physically sick. But with revolution spreading and the army unreliable, he had no choice. October 17th, 1905, the October Manifesto. Nicholas promised a constitution, a parliament, civil liberties. He signed it with tears in his eyes. Alexandra was furious, absolutely furious. Her husband had just surrendered his divine right to rule, and she couldn't forgive it. "You should never have signed that manifesto," she wrote to him. It was a moment of weakness. She saw democracy as a personal betrayal of her, of God, of everything they believed. From this moment on, she would work tirelessly to undermine every constitutional reform Nicholas had promised. Love had become political poison. Then came World War I. August 1914. Nicholas thought war would unite his people behind the throne. Instead, it exposed every weakness of the Russian system. Millions of soldiers with no rifles, no shells for the artillery, no boots for winter marches. German forces smashed through Russian lines like paper. By 1915, Russia had lost over 1 million men. The incompetence was staggering, and Nicholas, he blamed everyone except himself. Here's where Nicholas made his most catastrophic mistake. August 1915. Against all advice, he decided to take personal command of the army. His ministers begged him not to. His generals warned him. Even Alexandra hesitated. But Nicholas was convinced he could turn the tide through sheer willpower and divine favour. What he actually did was tie his personal reputation to every military disaster. Every defeat became his defeat. Every dead soldier died on his orders. With Nicholas at the front, Alexandra effectively became ruler of Russia. Think about that for a second. A German-born princess, deeply unpopular, politically tone-deaf, running an empire at war with Germany. She dismissed competent ministers who crossed her. She appointed Rasputin's favourites to key positions. Her letters to Nicholas are painful to read. "Be firm, my darling. Show them the fist," while the country starved and soldiers died without ammunition. The ministerial musical chairs became a joke. Ministers lasted weeks, sometimes days in office. Between 1915 and 1917, Russia had 4 different prime ministers, 6 interior ministers, 3 war ministers. Nobody could build coherent policy. Nobody could fix the supply crisis. Government became a revolving door of incompetents and opportunists. Meanwhile, bread lines stretched for blocks in Petrograd. People were eating bark and leather. The monarchy was committing suicide. Rasputin had become a national scandal. This Siberian peasant was sleeping in the palace, influencing appointments, scandalizing society with his drinking and womanizing. Aristocrats whispered that Alexandra was under his spell, maybe literally. The rumors got darker, more sexual, more treasonous. By 1916, even loyal monarchists wanted him gone, but Alexandra protected him absolutely. He was saving her son's life. She wouldn't hear criticism. She couldn't see the damage. December 29th, 1916, Prince Felix Yusupov and several conspirators invited Rasputin to his palace. They fed him poisoned wine and cakes. He kept eating, kept drinking, seemingly immune, so they shot him. He still didn't die. They beat him with clubs, tied him up, threw him through a hole in the ice of the Neva River. Even then, autopsy showed water in his lungs. He drowned, still fighting. The man was nearly indestructible, but not quite. Alexandra was devastated by Rasputin's murder. She'd lost her son's protector, her spiritual guide, her link to God's will. Nicholas rushed back from the front to comfort her, but the damage was done. The conspirators expected gratitude. Instead, they got exile. The monarchy's last defenders had given up hope. Revolution was coming, and everyone knew it. In 2 months, 300 years of Romanov rule would end in a train car. Love had led them to destruction. State of emergency. The February Revolution. February 1917. Petrograd is starving. Literally starving. Bread lines stretch for blocks. Women wait 6 hours in freezing cold for loaves that don't exist. Coal shortages mean factory workers can't heat their homes. The war has drained everything, and Nicholas, he's at military headquarters, 400 miles away, completely oblivious to what's brewing in his capital. Alexandra is running the government from the Alexander Palace, writing him love letters while the city burns. This is how empires collapse, not with grand battles, but with empty stomachs and frozen fingers. The numbers tell the story. 3 years of war have killed 2 million Russian soldiers. Inflation has made food prices impossible. A pound of meat costs what a worker makes in 3 days. Meanwhile, the imperial family still has 20-course dinners, still plays tennis on manicured courts. The disconnect is staggering. Alexandra writes to Nicholas about her garden, while bread lines riot outside bakeries. She genuinely doesn't understand why people are angry. They should be grateful, she tells friends. We're fighting for Russia's honor, but honor doesn't fill empty stomachs. And patience was running out completely. February 23rd, International Women's Day. What starts as peaceful protests turns ugly fast. Women march for bread. Workers join them. By afternoon, 100,000 people fill Nevsky Prospect, chanting, angry, desperate. The police try to disperse them, but there are too many. February 24th, the crowds double. February 25th, they're calling for the Tsar's abdication. Nicholas gets telegrams describing minor disturbances. His advisors are lying to him, or maybe they're lying to themselves. Either way, by February 26th, soldiers are deserting their posts to join the protesters. The revolution isn't coming anymore. It's here. Nicholas finally grasps the situation on February 27th. His own generals are telling him to abdicate. Think about that. The military leaders he trusts most are saying he needs to step down to save Russia. His train gets stopped by Revolutionary Guards. They won't let him return to Petrograd. He's effectively a prisoner, sitting in a railway car, realizing his reign is over. The man who believed God chose him to rule Russia is being told by everyone, including his own mother, that he has to give up the throne. The weight of that decision, it's crushing him. His diary entry from March 2nd, 1917. This gets me every time. Nicholas writes, "At 1 o'clock this afternoon I signed the Abdication Act. All around me is treachery, cowardice and deceit." You can feel his heartbreak in those words. 23 years as Tsar, and it ends with a signature on a piece of paper in a train car. He thought he was saving Russia by stepping down. Instead, he was just letting go of everything his family had built for 3 centuries. The Romanov dynasty ended with fountain pen ink and despair. Alexandra gets the news by telegram. Her husband is no longer Tsar. Her son will never inherit the throne. Everything she believed about their divine right to rule, gone. She's at the Alexander Palace with 4 sick daughters. all recovering from measles, and little Alexei, who's having one of his bleeding episodes. The servants are leaving, guards are deserting. She can hear crowds gathering outside the palace gates, chanting for the royal family's blood. For the first time in 23 years of marriage, Alexandra is truly alone and terrified. The isolation starts eating at them. The family that once ruled the largest empire on earth is now confined to a few rooms in their own palace. No visitors, no news except what their captors allow. The children don't understand what's happening. Anastasia, the youngest, keeps asking when Papa is coming home and why they can't go outside. Alexandra tries to maintain routines, lessons, prayers, family meals, but you can see it in photographs from this period. Her face is drawn, anxious. She's aging years in weeks. The psychological pressure is immense. Public opinion turns completely savage. Newspapers that once praised Alexandra now call her the German woman and blame her for Russia's defeats. They print cartoons showing her as a traitor, a spy, a monster. Stories spread that she and Nicholas lived in luxury while soldiers died without boots. Some of it's true, some exaggerated, but perception is reality. The people who once knelt before their Tsar now want his head. Alexandra reads some of these newspapers, despite attempts to shield her. The hatred, it's overwhelming. She can't comprehend how love turned to such venom. Through it all, Nicholas and Alexandra cling to each other. Their letters during his journey home from military headquarters are heartbreaking. "My beloved, my darling," she writes. "Come back to me quickly." He responds with equal desperation. "I can only think of you and our dear children." Even facing the collapse of everything they believed in, their first concern is each other. It's beautiful and tragic. Their love, which once seemed like their greatest strength, now feels like the only thing they have left. The empire is gone, but they still have this. The provisional government takes control, but Russia is chaos. Multiple factions fighting for power. The war continues. Economic collapse accelerates. Lenin returns from exile with his radical ideas about workers' revolution. Violence erupts in cities across the empire. Nicholas watches from house arrest as the country he once ruled tears itself apart. He writes in his diary about feeling helpless, useless. This man who once commanded millions of subjects can't even protect his own family. The political unrest isn't just around them anymore. It's swallowing them whole. As this chapter closes, we see Nicholas and Alexandra trying desperately to preserve something normal for their children. Evening prayers, bedtime stories, gentle teasing between siblings, but outside their windows, Russia burns. Their letters to each other become more urgent, more frightened. "We must be strong for each other," Alexandra writes. "Whatever happens, we face it together." They don't know yet that their time is running out. They can't imagine the basement in Yekaterinburg waiting 18 months ahead. For now, they have their love, their faith, and each other. Soon, even that won't be enough. Fall of an empire. The Romanov family in captivity. March 1917. The train car where Nicholas signed his abdication was cold, cramped, and smelled of cigarettes and fear. Just like that, 300 years of Romanov rule ended with a fountain pen scratch. But here's what gets me about this whole collapse. The public Nicholas, the Tsar who'd lost his empire, complete disaster. The private Nicholas, still writing love notes to his wife, still reading bedtime stories to his daughters, still believing somehow they'd figure this out together, because that's who they were. House arrest at Tsarskoye Selo wasn't prison yet. They had their palace, their servants, their routines. Nicholas chopped wood in the garden. The girls still had their tutors. Alexandra still wrote her daily letters, though now they were monitored by guards who probably couldn't believe they were reading the private thoughts of the former Empress of Russia. She wrote about small things: the weather, Alexei's health, whether they'd have enough coal for winter, normal family stuff, except this family used to rule 1/6 of the world's landmass. The letters from this period, they're heartbreaking. Alexandra writing to her sister in Germany, "We live quietly, try not to think of the future." Nicholas in his diary, "Weather fine, chopped wood, played with the children, like they're on some extended country vacation instead of watching their world disintegrate." The Revolutionary Guards initially treated them with awkward respect. These were simple soldiers, suddenly responsible for the people they'd been taught to revere as God's chosen representatives on earth. Nobody really knew the protocol for guarding fallen gods. But the respect didn't last. As 1917 dragged on, and Russia's situation got worse, food shortages, military defeats, cities in chaos, the guards grew hostile. They started writing graffiti on the palace walls, crude drawings, insults about Alexandra and Rasputin. The servants who'd worked there for decades were dismissed or quit. The family had to learn to make their own beds, prepare simple meals. Olga and Tatiana, who'd never washed a dish in their lives, were suddenly doing laundry. This was their new reality. Former autocrats learning to fold sheets. Nicholas adapted better than you'd expect. He'd always preferred simple pleasures, gardening, reading, time with his family. But Alexandra struggled. This woman who'd believed so fiercely in divine right, who'd told Nicholas to be more autocratic, she couldn't accept their fall. She kept expecting someone to restore them. Some loyal general, some foreign relative, some miracle. Her letters from this time show a woman clinging to a reality that no longer existed, still signing herself Alexandra in the imperial script, still expecting servants to bow. The children handled it differently. Olga, the eldest at 22, seemed to understand they weren't coming back from this. She grew quiet, serious, helped care for Alexei when his hemophilia flared up. Tatiana tried to keep everyone's spirits up. Maria and Anastasia, the youngest, still played games and giggled together. Kids adapt, but they all noticed when their photographs were torn down from public buildings and replaced with Lenin's portrait. When letters from friends stopped coming, when the outside world moved on without them. August 1917 brought the move to Tobolsk, Siberia. Deeper into exile, further from any hope of rescue. The train journey took days. Local officials didn't know whether to treat them as prisoners or guests. Some still called Nicholas Your Majesty, others just pointed and whispered. At each station stop, crowds gathered to stare at the fallen dynasty. Alexandra stayed in her compartment with the curtains drawn. She couldn't bear seeing the faces of people who'd once thrown flowers and now threw nothing but cold stares. Tobolsk was different, harsher. The governor's house where they lived was comfortable but small. 8 people sharing space meant for half that. No privacy, guards watching everything. Their letters were censored, their visitors screened, their daily walks supervised. Alexandra's health deteriorated, heart problems, probably stress-related. She spent more time in bed, leaving Nicholas to manage the household and care for Alexei. Role reversal. The man who'd once commanded millions, now managing laundry schedules and meal planning, and somehow he seemed almost content doing it. Their love letters from Tobolsk are different from the passionate exchanges of their youth. Less romantic fire, more quiet devotion. Nicholas writing, "My beloved, we have each other and our children. That is enough." Alexandra responding, "Whatever happens, we face it together." They'd given up hope of restoration, but not of each other. When she was bedridden, he'd sit beside her for hours, reading aloud, holding her hand. When Alexei had bleeding episodes, they took turns staying awake, monitoring his condition. Still a team, still united against the world. The final move to Yekaterinburg in April 1918 changed everything. This wasn't house arrest anymore. This was prison. The Ipatiev house, which the Bolsheviks renamed the House of Special Purpose. Ominous much. The guards were different too. Harder men who called Nicholas Citizen Romanov and made the family do their own cleaning. Alexandra could barely walk by then, but she scrubbed floors on her knees alongside her daughters, imperial princesses washing dishes and emptying chamber pots. The revolution's revenge playing out in domestic humiliation. But here's what destroys me about their final weeks. Despite everything, the loss of empire, the imprisonment, the daily humiliations, the approaching end they must have sensed, they still loved each other completely. Nicholas still wrote in his diary about small family moments. Alexandra still worried about Alexei's health more than her own fate. The girls still laughed together. Love persisted when everything else crumbled. That basement in Yekaterinburg took their lives, but it couldn't touch what they'd built together. 30 years of devotion that outlasted an empire, awakening to a nightmare, the gruesome end. May 1918, the Romanov family gets loaded onto a train heading east, deeper into Siberia, away from any hope of rescue. Their destination, Yekaterinburg, a grimy industrial town where the Bolsheviks have prepared what they call the House of Special Purpose. Nicholas carries Alexei, who's too weak to walk. Alexandra leans on her daughters. They don't know it yet, but they have exactly 2 months left. 2 months to say goodbye to each other without realizing it's goodbye. The Ipativ house. That's where they're imprisoned now. Merchant Ipativ's mansion, commandeered by the local Bolsheviks and turned into a fortress. Windows painted over, high wooden fence surrounding the property, armed guards everywhere. The family gets 13 rooms on the upper floor. Sounds generous until you realize they're sharing this space with their remaining servants, their doctor, and constant surveillance. Every letter censored, every conversation monitored. The walls are literally closing in. And the guards, they're getting more hostile every day. Their daily routine becomes this strange mixture of normal family life and captivity. Nicholas reads to the children. Alexandra does needlework, still embroidering despite everything. The girls play cards, write in their diaries. Alexei, when he's feeling stronger, plays with his toy soldiers. They have no idea that Lenin himself has been debating their fate in Moscow. No idea that local Bolsheviks are getting impatient. The civil war is intensifying. White army forces are approaching Yekaterinburg. Time is running out for everyone. July 16th turns into July 17th, just after midnight. The family is sleeping when they hear footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots, multiple men, then pounding on their door. Yakov Yurovsky, the commandant, bursts in with several guards. Get up, get dressed, quickly. Nicholas sits up, confused. What's happening? White forces are approaching the city. We're evacuating you for your safety. Alexandra struggles to sit up. The children are groggy, frightened. Alexei can barely move. This is it. The moment their world ends. Imagine the confusion in those rooms. 4 young women fumbling for clothes in the dark. Alexei, weak from his latest bleeding episode, being helped by his father. Alexandra, her heart condition making every movement painful, trying to dress with dignity. They'd sewn their remaining jewels into their corsets and clothing, these precious stones that would ironically prolong their suffering in just a few minutes. Nicholas helps everyone, still playing the protective father, still believing they're really being evacuated, still hoping. The guards are shouting, "Hurry up!" Down the stairs they go. Nicholas carrying Alexei, Alexandra leaning on Tatiana and Olga. The younger girls, Maria and Anastasia, stay close together. Their doctor, their cook, their valet, everyone who's left gets herded down these stairs, into the basement. The room they're led to is small. Stone walls, 1 window, no furniture except for 2 chairs. Alexandra looks around, confused. Where are we going exactly? Yurovsky doesn't answer. He positions them against the wall like he's arranging a photograph. But this isn't a photograph. May I have a chair? Alexandra asks. Her heart, her legs. She can't stand for long anymore. They bring her a chair. Nicholas stands behind her, one hand on her shoulder. Alexei sits in the other chair, too weak to stand. The four daughters arrange themselves nearby. For a moment, they look like a family portrait. 3 centuries of Romanov rule about to end in this basement. And they still don't understand. Yurovsky steps back, pulls out a piece of paper, starts reading from it. The family listens, still confused. The Ural Regional Soviet has decided to execute you. Those words hit the family like a physical blow. Nicholas starts to say something. What? What? But there's no time. Yurovsky pulls out his revolver. The door opens and more men rush in, all armed. What happens next is chaos. Gunfire, screaming. The children's jeweled clothing deflects some bullets, creating ricochets, confusion. It's not quick. It's not clean. When it's finally over, the silence in that basement is absolute. The Romanov dynasty ended. 304 years. That's how long the Romanovs had ruled Russia. From Michael Romanov in 1613 to Nicholas II in 1918. All of it ending in that basement in Yekaterinburg. The bodies are loaded onto trucks, taken to a mine shaft outside town, burned, doused with acid, buried in unmarked graves that wouldn't be found for decades. The official announcement comes later that week. Only Nicholas was executed. The family was evacuated to a safe place. Nobody believed it. Everybody knew. Think about what we just witnessed. A love story that lasted 30 years, ended in violence in a basement. Nicholas and Alexandra, who wrote each other thousands of love letters, who called each other Sonny and Nicky, who never spent a night apart by choice. Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, daughters who giggled and gossiped and dreamed about their futures. Alexei, the little boy whose illness broke his parents' hearts. All of them gone. The love that had sustained them through revolution and exile couldn't save them from history's judgment. Their story forces us to confront something uncomfortable. Love isn't always enough. Nicholas and Alexandra loved each other completely. They loved their children fiercely, but their love existed in a bubble that sealed them off from reality. While they wrote tender letters to each other, their empire was starving. While they focused on Alexei's health, millions were dying in war. Their devotion to each other became indifference to everyone else. And history doesn't forgive that. Even when love is genuine, even when it's beautiful, sometimes love alone just isn't enough. Aftermath: the fall and rise of Romanov legacy, July 17th, 1918. The shots have finally stopped echoing in that basement in Yekaterinburg. 7 family members, their doctor, their cook, their servants, all dead. But here's what gets me about this story. The horror didn't end there. For the next 80 years, nobody knew where they were actually buried. The Bolsheviks had tried to erase them completely. Acid, fire, shallow graves in unmarked forest. They wanted the Romanov dynasty to vanish like it never existed. Except, you can't really erase royal blood. Within hours of the executions, loyalist forces were already mobilizing. White army commanders had been planning a rescue for weeks. General Mikhail Dieterichs was marching toward Yekaterinburg with 10,000 men. Admiral Kolchak's forces controlled most of Siberia. They were literally days away from reaching the Ipatiev house. Think about that for a second. If they'd moved just 1 week earlier, if the train schedules had been different, if someone had gotten word through, Nicholas and Alexandra and their children might have survived. History balanced on knife's edge. The White Army reached Yekaterinburg 8 days too late. 8 days, General Dieterichs found the abandoned Ipatiev house and started investigating immediately. He discovered blood spatters, bullet holes, evidence of hasty cleanup. But the bodies, gone. Local Bolsheviks had been thorough. They'd loaded everything onto trucks in the middle of the night, driven to abandoned mine shafts, tried to dissolve the remains with sulfuric acid. When that didn't work completely, they moved them again, buried them in secret locations that died with their executioners. For decades, the mystery haunted Russia. Stalin kept the truth locked in secret archives. Even after his death, even during the Cold War, nobody talked about where the Romanovs actually were. Then in 1989, Soviet filmmaker Gili Ryabov got access to Communist Party files. What he found changed everything. Detailed confessions from the original killers, maps, coordinates. They'd been buried near a place called Pig's Meadow, about 12 miles from Yekaterinburg. After 71 years, someone finally knew where to look. July 1991. Russian investigators started digging in that forest clearing. What they found was heartbreaking and scientific at the same time. Bone fragments, dental work, personal effects that had somehow survived the acid. But here's the thing, they only found 7 bodies. Nicholas, Alexandra, 3 of their daughters and their 3 servants. Missing? Alexei and Maria, or maybe Anastasia. The exact identification would take years to sort out. 2 children were still missing, which meant the conspiracy theories were just getting started. The DNA testing took almost a decade. Russian scientists worked with British forensic experts, comparing bone fragments to blood samples from living Romanov relatives. Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth's husband, provided DNA. He was Alexandra's great-nephew. The results were definitive. These were the remains of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. But those missing children, that kept hope alive for pretenders and conspiracy theorists. Anna Anderson had claimed to be Anastasia for decades. Turns out she was a Polish factory worker. DNA proved it conclusively in 1994. 2007 brought another breakthrough. Archaeologists found a second burial site, just 65 feet from the first. 2 more bodies. A boy around 13, a young woman around 18. DNA confirmed it. Alexei and Maria. Now all 7 family members were accounted for. The physical evidence was complete, but that raised different questions. What do you do with the remains of people who died so violently, so long ago? How do you honor victims while acknowledging their failures as rulers? Russia struggled with these questions for years. The Russian Orthodox Church faced an impossible decision. Nicholas and Alexandra had been faithful believers. They died as martyrs, killed for their faith and their bloodline. Their children were completely innocent victims. Church tradition recognized saints who died for their beliefs, but these same people had presided over massive suffering. Bloody Sunday, 1905, millions dead in World War I. Poverty, oppression, failed leadership. Could failed rulers become saints? The theological debates went on for years before they reached their surprising conclusion. August 20th, 2000. The Russian Orthodox Church canonized the entire family, not as great martyrs, but as passion bearers, people who faced suffering and death in a Christ-like manner. The ceremony was extraordinary. Thousands of believers gathered in Moscow. Icons depicting Nicholas and Alexandra with halos appeared in churches across Russia. But here's what's fascinating about this decision. The church explicitly said they weren't being canonized for their leadership. They were saints because of how they died, not how they lived. That's the tragic irony that haunts the Romanov story. By all accounts, Nicholas and Alexandra were genuinely good people. They loved their children desperately. They remained faithful to each other through everything. They showed incredible grace under pressure during their imprisonment. Guards reported they never complained, never turned on each other. They shared their food, comforted their servants, maintained dignity even in that basement. They were compassionate, decent human beings. They were also catastrophically bad at ruling an empire of 125 million people. Today, pilgrims visit the Church on Blood in Yekaterinburg, built on the exact site where the Ipatiev house once stood. They pray to St. Nicholas and St. Alexandra, asking for healing, for family protection, for strength in suffering. It's a strange kind of redemption. The family that couldn't save their empire became symbols of faith, surviving impossible circumstances. Their love story, which we followed from those first numbered letters, to that final basement, became something larger than romance. It became a testament to human dignity, persisting even when everything else fails. An epilogue, a love story remembered. So here we are at the end. Nicholas and Alexandra, Nicky and Sonny, lying in that Yekaterinburg basement. July 17th, 1918. And I keep coming back to this one impossible question: how do you reconcile it all? Here were two people who genuinely, completely adored each other. They never cheated, never fought publicly, supported each other through everything. By every measure of what makes a good marriage, they succeeded brilliantly, and yet their empire burned while they played happy families. That's the thing that gets me about this story. We want our heroes clean, right? Good people who do good things, bad people who do bad things. But Nicholas and Alexandra mess with that completely. Read their letters, they're sweet, supportive, tender with each other. Then read about the millions starving in Russian villages while they worried about Alexei's tennis lessons. Same people, same timeline. How do you square that circle? You can't. That's what makes this story so haunting. Their love wasn't fake. That's what's so maddening about it all. 24 years of marriage, never a single documented affair, constant letters when apart. My beloved angel, my sweet wifey, I kiss you tenderly, real affection, real partnership. But here's the cruel irony, that very closeness became their prison. They created this perfect little bubble of family devotion, and inside that bubble, everyone agreed with them. Everyone said they were wonderful. Everyone told them what they wanted to hear. Alexandra especially. God, she was so certain about everything. Divine right, autocracy, Russia's destiny, never a moment of doubt. And Nicholas, he doubted everything except her. So when she told him to be more autocratic, ignore the parliament, trust Rasputin over his ministers, he listened. Because husbands listen to wives they love. Because when someone has your back completely, you start thinking they must be right about everything else too. Love became an echo chamber. Devotion became delusion. Think about the timing for a second. 1905 revolution. Nicholas grants a constitution, hates every minute of it. Alexandra calls it humiliating. Then World War I hits. Nicholas takes command of the army, leaves her running things in Petrograd. And what does she do? Dismisses competent ministers, promotes Rasputin's favourites, writes to her husband, "Be Peter the Great, even the terrible, crush them all." This from a woman who'd never governed anything bigger than a tea party. But she was so sure. Here's what keeps me up at night about this story. What if Nicholas had married someone different? Someone who questioned him instead of reinforcing him. Someone who said, maybe we should listen to these parliament people instead of crush them all under you. Would Russian history look different? Would millions of lives have been saved? Would their own children still be alive? We'll never know, but that's the terrible weight of counterfactual history. All those what-ifs built on one young couple's choice to love each other completely. The crazy thing is, they could have been so happy as private people. Imagine Nicholas and Alexandra as minor nobility somewhere, managing an estate, raising 5 kids, writing those sweet letters when he travelled on business. No crown, no pressure, no empire, depending on their decisions. Just 2 people who loved each other, loved their children, lived quietly. They would have been genuinely wonderful at that life. Instead, fate handed them absolute power over 125 million souls. And love alone wasn't enough for that burden. Even at the end, even in captivity, they never turned on each other. Guards reported they never fought, never blamed each other for the disaster. Nicholas chopped wood. Alexandra tended their small garden. They played cards with their children, read together, supported each other through house arrest like they'd supported each other through everything else. Right up until that final night, when they dressed quickly, carried sick Alexei downstairs, and faced the firing squad as a family, united in death as in life. The Russian Orthodox Church canonized them as saints in 2000, not as great rulers, as martyrs, people who suffered and died for their faith. And maybe that's the only way to make sense of it all. Maybe you can't be a good person and a good autocrat at the same time. Maybe love and power are fundamentally incompatible. Maybe the very qualities that made them wonderful spouses and parents, tenderness, loyalty, the desire to protect family above all, made them disasters as rulers of a vast, complex, desperate empire. So what's the lesson here? Love isn't enough. Family isn't everything. I don't think it's that simple. I think it's about balance, about staying connected to the world beyond your inner circle. Nicholas and Alexandra's tragedy wasn't that they loved each other too much. It was that they loved only each other. Their devotion became a wall that kept out uncomfortable truths, dissenting voices, reality itself. Love needs windows, not just mirrors. It needs to breathe, to grow, to include the wider human family. As you drift off tonight, remember them not just as failed rulers, but as two young people who found each other across the ballrooms of Europe and chose to build something beautiful together. They failed spectacularly at ruling Russia, but they succeeded completely at loving each other. Maybe that's enough for a bedtime story. Maybe that's all any of us can really control, not whether we'll change the world, but whether we'll love the people closest to us well. Sweet dreams. History will keep its secrets and its sorrows. You just rest.